So welcome everyone. We're really pleased that you've joined us this evening for our Tulane Family Programs webinar on the Clery Act and crime reporting information. I'll be hosting the webinar, and I am really pleased to have you join us. This is an important topic. We are presenting this for families of our incoming new students, and then it will be available for all families later on our website. This is a topic, of course, that is very important to parents and family members. We know that you want your students to be as safe as possible, and that is certainly something that we share with you. And so our Tulane University Police Department works in many ways to educate students about how to be safe, helps respond to incidents, and has a really well-developed staff to support all kinds of different safety measures on campus. And then we also have a staff member who is speaking to us tonight, Margaret Martin, who is the Clery Act coordinator for Tulane University. So she's responsible for the compliance of the university with the Clery Act, the Disclosure of Campus Security Policy, Crime Statistics Act, and other federal and state laws. And she will explain more about that. It's very detailed. Again, we want you to know that you don't need to take notes while she's speaking. We'll have the PDF available on the website. So now I will turn things over to Margaret and join you again at the Q&A time.
Thank you, Penny. Good evening, everyone. My name is Margaret Martin, and like Penny said, I'm the Clery Act coordinator for the university. And what that means is I oversee how the university responds to criminal instances that occur in and around our campus, as well as overlapping with other departments like Title IX and campus services to make sure that we're providing the best resources possible to our students, faculty, staff, and other affiliates while remaining compliant with federal law. A little bit about me. I am a double Tulane alumna. I did both undergraduate and law school here at Tulane. After graduating from law school, I was a state prosecutor here in Orleans Parish, primarily focusing on sex crimes, and then a federal prosecutor in Baton Rouge, focusing there as well on child exploitation and child pornography. I've been back at the institution since 2021, and I'm excited to talk with you tonight about the Clery Act, which you're probably not very familiar with if you don't have children in college. So let's get started. So the Clery Act is a federal law that only applies to colleges and universities that receive federal funding. So unlike something like Title IX, the Clery Act is a law that only applies to institutions of higher education. So if you don't have children or family members who have gone through college or gone through higher education in the United States, you're probably not familiar with the Clery Act. The Clery Act oversees every single institution in the United States that receives some sort of federal funding, and we'll be walking through that today. So today we'll be talking a little about the history of the Clery Act, as well as the purpose of it, what universities across the United States are required to do in order to be compliant with Clery, what Clery crimes look like, Clery geography, and some notifications that universities are required to distribute to their communities based on those Clery Act requirements. Now, before we do get started, I do like to give a content warning while talking about the Clery Act. This is a federal law that oversees crime on our college campuses and how institutions go about responding to crime. At times, that includes things like sexual violence and violent crimes, hate crimes, death, and substance abuse. So we will be touching on each of those things briefly this evening. At any point, if you need to leave the webinar or take a break, please feel free to take care of yourself during the course and scope of this presentation. So let's get into it. The history of the Clery Act is unfortunately a very tragic one. Jeanne Clery was raped and murdered in her dorm room at Lehigh University when she was 19 years old. She was a college freshman at that time. Prior to her untimely death, there was absolutely no requirement that institutions of higher education report out crime and safety measures on their college campuses. So after their daughter's death, the Clery family lobbied Congress to make universities be required to disclose this kind of information. The reason being is their daughter, Jeanne Clery, went to Lehigh University, and the year prior to her enrolling at Lehigh, there were 40 violent crimes that occurred on or around that campus. And they had felt if they had made they had been made aware of those kinds of crimes that occurred on Lehigh's campus, they would have encouraged their daughter to potentially explore a different option in her higher education. So the Clery family lobbied for this change in federal legislation, and that's how we have the Clery Act. That's how it got developed, and Congress has continued the Clery Act since the 80s. We've seen a lot of changes to it over time. We continue to see changes over time, similar to higher education, but this is the impetus of how we came about the Clery Act. So the purpose of the Clery Act, if you're familiar at all with federal law and federal legislation, the Clery Act is actually a consumer protection law. When we think about consumer protection, we often think about things like warnings on prescription medication, black box warnings and things like that, warnings about what you're purchasing. And when the reason we're thinking about the Clery Act as a consumer protection law is because we want people like yourselves, parents, potential students, potential faculty and staff members to be able to make informed decisions about their safety and what's important to them when they're considering their higher education or their employer. So that's why Clery lives as a consumer protection law, unlike something like Title IX, which is a civil rights law. So the university, Tulane, and all other institutions of higher education have 4 major requirements under the Clery Act. The first one is the collection of all campus crime data, and we'll go through what that looks like a little bit. The next one is distributing warnings and when there is something of a serious or ongoing threat or an emergency to the campus community. The third is supporting victims of violence. This is where we have the most overlap with our offices like Title IX. Clery intersects with the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. So this is how we support our victims of crime and other tragedies around our campus. That lives within Clery Act compliance. And then lastly, every year Tulane does distribute what's called the annual security report. This is something that comes out every year on October 1st. It is a very long document that I'm currently authoring that contains all the policies and information about safety and security on our college campus. Everything from how our Title IX adjudications are proceeding or how students can evacuate from a hurricane. It's a great document with lots of information, and it is distributed every year on October 1st. So I know it's not the latest Harry Potter novel, but if you want to stay up until midnight on October 1st, that's when it'll be distributed with this year's information. So the first thing we're going to be talking about today is Clery Act crimes and Clery Act crime statistics. Clery Act oversees how we define crimes by definitions given to us by the Department of Education. What I can tell you as a former prosecutor is these are very frustrating definitions. These crimes and their definition are given to us by the Department of Education, which is different how we look at crimes here in the state of Louisiana or even federal crimes at the federal prosecution level. So there are 4 major groupings of crimes, the first one being criminal offenses, the next being hate crimes, and the third one being Violence Against Women Act offenses. We also do statistic collection and information for all of our arrests and referrals for disciplinary action as well. I will say at this time that there is a lot of legalese that goes behind all of this. Like I said, these are very nuanced definitions given to us by the Department of Education. I will not be spending too much time going through those idiosyncrasies this evening with you all. But if at any point you have questions about how the Department of Education wants to define these crimes, I'd be more than happy to talk with you about it, and my contact information will be at the end. So the first grouping is our criminal statistics, our criminal offenses. This is what the Department of Education wants us to think about as a felony offense. This includes criminal homicide, murder, manslaughter, non-negligent manslaughter, manslaughter by negligence. The next is sexual assault, which includes rape, fondling, incest, and statutory rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, motor vehicle theft, and arson. So these are all of our criminal offenses that the Department of Education wants us to be overseeing and keeping a close eye on. Like I said, these definitions are very different than Louisiana state law or federal criminal law. The best example I can give here is the Department of Education says that every time we have a golf cart go missing, that could be students joyriding around in a golf cart after a great football game, they want us to classify that as a motor vehicle theft. As a former Louisiana prosecutor, I can tell you we would not charge anyone with grand theft auto for taking a motor vehicle, but that's how the Department of Education wants us to classify it. So things are very different, very nuanced, and all of these crimes have very specific definitions as given to us by the Department of Education that we have to follow. Like I said, we oversee sexual assault offenses. This is different than what we see in Title IX. These are different definitions and different terminology. We use rape, fondling, incest, and statutory rape specifically for our sexual assault offenses, which is different than those Title IX terminologies that you might have heard about previously. So here's a little bit of information about that and how we go about reporting. The important thing to note for Clery Act crimes specifically is the Clery Act oversees every single allegation of crimes occurring in and around Tulane's campus. So really important to note here that there is not an investigation that is required. And we also don't necessarily need any disclosing information about the victim or the survivor to include it for Clery Act statistics or to trigger our federal obligations. So for an example, if a student comes forward and they say, I was sexually assaulted, that's all I want to share with you. This is the only information I have. I was sexually assaulted in a dorm room on Tulane's campus. I don't want to go through a conduct process. Clery will ensure that that individual still gets connected to resources because we have that federal obligation, but it's not going to require them to go through any sort of formal adjudication, like a Title IX investigation or a criminal prosecution. So every single thing that comes through my office on my desk about what is being disclosed to the university is evaluated for criminal statistics and our federal obligations under the Clery Act. Moving on, we just talked about our criminal offenses. Next, we're going to be talking about our next grouping of crimes collected by the Clery Act, and that's hate crimes. So hate crimes is defined by the Department of Education as any criminal offense that is committed against a person or property that is motivated in whole or in part by the offender's bias. And we're going to be going through what those biases are today. So the categories of bias given to us by the Department of Education are race, gender and gender identity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, national origin, and ethnicity. So any crimes that we just previously spoke about, those criminal offenses, those could be hate crimes reported out to the Department of Education under this bias analysis, as well as these additional crimes given to us by the Department of Education, which are larceny, theft, simple assault, intimidation, destruction, damage, and vandalism to property. As you might remember, previously I just said those criminal offenses are what the Department of Education typically thinks as a felony, and these additional 4 offenses are what we think about as misdemeanor offenses. And the Department of Education only wants us to be reporting those out to you if they are motivated by hate or motivated by bias, and therefore classifying them as a hate crime. Our last grouping we're going to be talking about this evening is the Violence Against Women Act offenses. This is where we, like I said, we have the most overlap with Title IX. I like to say if Clery was one parent and Title IX was the other parent, then the Violence Against Women Act would be their child together. So the Violence Against Women Act includes all of our sexual assault crimes that we just previously spoke about, as well as domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So we talked about our criminal offenses, and next we're going to be moving on to Clery geography. So in order for the Department of Education and Tulane to have some sort of obligation triggered under the Clery Act, we have to have one of those crimes that have occurring on Tulane's Clery geography. So when you think about Clery, you want to think about Clery crime plus Clery geography equals an obligation by Tulane in some manner. So in order for something to be counted by Tulane under the Clery Act, it must incur in one of these 4 categories as given to us by the Department of Education. So we'll walk through each of these very quickly. So our first grouping is on campus. This is probably the most straightforward, easy. If you think you're on campus, you're probably on campus. I know tonight we're talking to first-year student families and parents. So if you're walking around campus when your student's moving in, all of that's probably our Clery geography. Now, if you go downtown for some reason, say you're going to visit the medical school, that gets a little bit trickier about what's our geography and what's our not. What's considered on campus, what is not. But for the purpose of you as first-year students, just think if you're on campus, it's probably our geography. Also important to note that the Department of Education wants to have specific care on our residence halls and other campus facilities. And the reason that is thinking about the impetus and the reason the Clery Act started was because Jeanne Clery was tragically raped and murdered in her dorm room at Lehigh University. So when we're thinking about where our crimes are occurring on our campus, we want to make sure that we're taking special care about our residence hall and making sure that those are some of our safest spaces on campus. The next grouping is going to be what we call off-campus, non-campus property. So these are the questions we ask ourselves. Does Tulane own or control any buildings, property located off our campus in another city or in another country? I will tell you right now, the answer to that question is yes. I'm sure you probably guessed it. Additionally, does Tulane have any officially recognized organizations? So these are student organizations. And the answer to that question is also yes. So the first definition of non-campus geography, so these are things that are not included on our campus, is any building or property that's not directly a part of our campus, but does contribute in some way to our educational purposes and is owned or controlled by the university in some way. So you're probably not familiar with what this picture is, but this is a building called the River Center. It's located on Tchoupitoulas. You will learn how to say that word if you're not from Louisiana. And it's a research facility that Tulane owns and controls, and sometimes we have classes there or event spaces there, but it's not directly a part of our campus. Any crime that occurs in that space or spaces similarly situated is going to trigger our Clery obligations. Here are some examples of our non-campus: geography, research facilities, athletic facilities, institution-owned hospitals, meeting and event spaces, our police security facilities, and some performing arts venues as well. So the Tulane University does not necessarily have ownership, but they might have some sort of lease agreement that gives us some sort of control of that property. And therefore, we want to know every sort of crime that's occurring on those spaces. Next, we have our non-campus geography. This is additional definition. We just talked about one definition of non-campus geography, which is that owned or controlled. And the second piece here is our recognized student organizations. So any building that is owned or controlled by a recognized student organization of Tulane's greater community is also reportable for Clery purposes. So we're thinking all of our Greek houses as well as our religious life organizations. Tulane does not necessarily own or control any of those spaces, any of those buildings, but because we have as an institution have come forward and said, we recognize you as a part of our greater Tulane community. We want to know what crimes are occurring on your spaces, and we want to make sure that we're reporting that information out and providing services to those individuals that may experience crime on those college campuses. Lastly, Tulane also makes sure that when we're tracking our students leaving, when they're traveling away from campus, if it is recognized by Tulane as travel under the banner of Tulane, we recognize that that travel as well and make sure we're collecting information at that time. The best example I can use in this situation is when Tulane evacuated for Hurricane Ida in 2021. We went to Houston. We had students staying in hotels in Houston with faculty and staff and other support measures. While we were staying in a hotel in Houston, there was a murder-suicide that occurred in one of those hotels. No one in the crime was involved in any way with Tulane, was not affiliated with Tulane in any way, shape, or form. But because we had students staying in that hotel as part of Tulane travel, we had an obligation to report that information out to the Department of Education to show that we're collecting statistics and crimes that occur where our students are traveling to make sure that we're providing the safest possible spaces for our students. Our last category is our public property. So if you don't know what this picture is, I promise you, you will soon. Tulane has a lot of intersecting streets because we have a beautiful campus in a beautiful urban environment. Whether it's downtown or uptown, we have public roads running through our campuses. The things that are associated with our public roads, crimes that occur on our public roads, those are also reportable to the Department of Education. The reason I'm showing you a picture of the boot, if you haven't had the pleasure yet of visiting, ask your child about it in a couple months and see if they have. The reason I show you this picture is because the boot shares a street with a Tulane residence hall. There's a Tulane residence hall named Greenbaum. There is a street, and then there is the boot. The boot is a bar not on campus, but obviously very close to it. Anything that occurs within the boot, we do not report out to the Department of Education. We don't trigger Clery obligations. However, anything that happens on that public street between the boot institution and that and our private residence hall, we do report out because we have that shared space, that public property, that public street is part of our campus and part of our Clery geography. So again, that's a summation of Clery geography. As you can see, it's very difficult to understand at times. It has a lot of rules. There's a lot of legalese that go into it. I did not go through absolutely everything that we can today, but that's a brief synopsis. Next, we're going to be talking about timely warnings and safety notifications. So part of the Clery Act oversees the way we let students and faculty and staff, our community, know about what's happening on our college campuses. So the Clery Act requires institutions of higher education to maintain something called a timely warning notification and an emergency notification. Today, I will not be speaking with you about emergency notifications because I know you've already had the opportunity to speak with our emergency management department, and they've probably spent a good amount of time talking with you about that. But I will talk about timely warnings this evening. So a timely warning is a requirement under the Clery Act that institutions of higher education, including Tulane, must notify their college campuses, their communities, when a serious or ongoing threat has occurred, and it is a Clery Act crime that occurred on Clery geography. So if you're thinking to yourself, why did Margaret just spend so much time talking about all of that geography and all of those Clery crimes? It's because that's what mandates what we report out to you. So in the event that a crime were to occur on our campus, and it is one of those Clery Act crimes, or it occurred on our non-campus property, like a Greek house or a religious organization, and it posed a serious or ongoing threat, the campus community is required to be notified of it. If you're like me, and maybe you're a lawyer thinking, Margaret, what's a serious or ongoing threat? That's very ambiguous. I will walk you through it now. Here are some factors. This is by no way an exhaustive list of our factors of what we consider to be an ongoing threat, but these are some things we look at as potential mitigating or aggravating factors to threats in our community. If someone has been arrested, a crime has occurred, but the arrest has been made, we might not send a notification out because there is no longer a present crime because an arrest has been made. If there are multiple victims or aggravating factors, that might lean us more towards presenting information or sending out a distribution of a crime. So now I'm going to show you how you get this information. So this is what our website looks like. This is on publicsafety.tulane.edu/crime alerts. This is a screenshot. I'm going to walk you through it in just a moment. But as you can see, these are crime alerts that we sent out in the last, I think these are 12 months. But next, I'm going to take you directly to our website. This is available to you and it'll be linked in the presentation when you have the slides. But as you can see, these are some of the crime alerts that we've sent out recently. I will note that these are not all the crime alerts we have sent out. We are doing some work to our public safety website right now. And so we have some things missing on our website, but this is how you as a parent will be able to sign up for this listserv of crime alerts. Your student is automatically enrolled. As a student of Tulane, it is required that your student is automatically enrolled to receive these kinds of Clery Act timely warning notifications. It is a federal requirement. They also cannot opt out of receiving these notifications. That is also a federal requirement. Parents are not automatically enrolled in this listserv. It is only federally required for students, faculty, staff, and other affiliates. However, you as a parent can opt into these crime alert notifications. And you can do so here, and we would encourage you to do so. So I'll show you an example of a timely warning notification that we submitted. This was on February 18th, 2023. This is what they look like. So typically crime alerts, we no longer call them crime alerts, we call them timely warning notifications. You can see that here. It'll come out in an email. It will tell you it is a timely warning. It will tell you what the crime was, and it will tell you where it occurred, as well as the kind of offense and the date. So this is an example. This would have been emailed on February 18th to all students, faculty, and staff. This has the information about what was reported to the university, what kind of crime occurred, where it occurred, and a brief synopsis. I will note that all of this information that we include in our timely warning notifications does not include any identifying information about the victim, survivor, or reporting person of the crime. Also, you will see here that you are receiving this notification in compliance with the Clery Act, as well as if you have any additional information, please report it to Tulane at the police department here. And then lastly, we have some information about, please remember these safety tips. These safety tips are always going to be relative to the kind of crime that's reported in the timely warning notification that has been emailed. This is a requirement of the Clery Act. So Clery Act requires that universities, when they're distributing a timely warning notification, to include safety tips. And then some additional information here. I will let you guys look at that at your leisure. Now back to the presentation. Now you will note that that crime that we just looked at, it was a rape on our Uptown campus. So it was a Clery Act crime that occurred on our Clery geography. So this makes it a required Clery notification. But I will note that not every rape that occurs on Tulane's campus requires a timely warning notification. Remember, it has to meet one of these serious or ongoing threats. It has to have some kind of information that we feel as an institution requires us to send it, elevates it in such a way that our community is at risk for a serious or ongoing threat. So if you are listening to students talking about sexual violence or other kinds of crime on our campus, and you think to yourself, why didn't Tulane send us an alert about it? There's probably a reason. Every single one of our crimes that gets reported to us goes through a matrix, goes through an analysis about why it should or should not receive a notification to the larger campus community. So next, we also have what we call safety notices. These are notices that we can send out as well for our non-Clery Act crimes or crimes that occur outside our Clery geography that are reported to campus security authorities or anyone here at Tulane that we may consider to be an ongoing threat or may just somewhat signal to a ongoing trend of crime in New Orleans. And I'll show you some examples of that as well. So like I said, we're just back right here at the same website. We're going to go back and click over here again. Let's see if we go. Okay. So you can see that we have differentiated these here between timely warning notifications. So those are those required information from Clery Act crimes, and then safety notices. So here's an example of a safety notice. This was a safety notice that was distributed for vehicular burglaries on our downtown campus. Now, if you recall all the way back to the crimes we talked about earlier in the presentation, vehicular burglaries is not a Clery Act crime, so we're not required to distribute this information. The reason we decided to send out this, what we call safety notice about vehicular burglaries, is because we had multiple reports of them. So I think we had, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think we had about 4 reports of vehicular burglaries that had occurred in and around our downtown campus. We also had a reporting person describe the perpetrator. So we wanted to get this information out to both assist in law enforcement investigation, as well as let people know here are some safety tips you can do to not become a victim of a vehicular burglary or try to attempt it the best you can in the city of New Orleans. So that's a little bit about the Clery Act and our notifications, and we will let me get back here. And that's all I'm going to be talking with you about tonight. And I'm ready for questions whenever you are, Penny.
So to all of our attendees, now is the time when you can type your questions into that question feature on your control panel. So I'll just wait a little bit to see if anybody wants to submit a question. And I do just want to just re-emphasize that those timely warnings and safety notifications are sent automatically only to enrolled students of that semester and faculty and staff. So parents have to opt in, and you'll get that that link again when we make these available on the website, the Family Programs website. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm gonna make sort of a last call. I think it's also important to remember, as your student gets older and progresses through their different class years at Tulane, there may come a point then when your student might choose to live off campus. And I think that parents might think that's when they, need their students to be more mindful of all of these things. And that is true. And we do try to educate students as much as possible about that. And we have resources about off-campus living that you'll have access to as your student kind of gets to that point. And so we'll also share within that resource, there's a guide, there's a print book, and then we also make it available as a PDF. So if you wanted to look up the New Orleans Police Department crime statistics, then you could see those in case that helped you determine, whether or not you might want to choose between different off-campus properties for your students to rent. The other thing that happens, and you probably have these kinds of neighborhood blogs and Facebook groups and websites, that there are some neighborhood specific things out there where people will post things about, whether it's information they've gleaned from the newspaper or from crime reporting from NOPD, from New Orleans Police Department, or other things that people just contribute. And sometimes our families subscribe to those, and they can they can get confused about where those boundaries of those areas are and think that those are things that are happening near campus or where our students are likely to live. And sometimes they're not so familiar with really the boundaries of those neighborhoods and what's being reported by people. So I think that you have to be savvy about that. So please pay attention to that if you get to that point. Also our students travel a lot around campus, and first year students aren't allowed to have cars. So oftentimes they are on foot and they are taking risks that we wouldn't, we would caution them against, in terms of just, being out late, maybe by themselves or something. We're always encouraging students. I'm not saying that anybody, not to like victim blame or anything, but what we try to do is encourage students to make safer choices and travel in groups and be aware of their surroundings and stick to well-traveled, well-lit pathways, and let people know where they're going and when they anticipate being back. So all of those things are also just part of our public safety education that your student will also get once they are here. And that's an ongoing thing. They get some of that information before they arrive. They get more at the beginning of the year. It's mentioned again through our peer mentors and RAs, who are those trained upper class students who are mentoring your students and giving them guidance. And so they'll start to learn how all of these things kind of intersect, so they can take that training, the information, the education, these notices, and learn how to make smarter, safer choices in navigating their life in a new environment. And these are life skills that would be applicable to anywhere new that they move to. They're just not always going to be in some mapped out space where there's oversight and federal requirements that they are notified. So this is a safety measure, and that is very beneficial. So I know that kind of hearing about these things and learning about how we do this can be a bit anxiety provoking at first, but we want to present it so that that there are these, there's this network of resources and information that's designed to help your student be safer. So we hope that you'll remember that and help that reassure you about what we're doing here at Tulane to help your student and help give you some more peace of mind too. So I don't see any other questions. So I think, Margaret, is there any last thing you would like to mention before we close?
The only thing I'd like to mention is that Tulane has been such a wonderful home to me and was such a great experience when I was a college freshman. I have no doubt that your students will feel similarly. The Clery Act is a federal law with lots of twists and turns and federal oversight, but when we think about the Clery Act, the most important thing to remember is really the intention of the law, right? Is so that people can make those informed decisions about their safety. That is the intention of the law, just like that's the reason it's a consumer protection law. Just like when you're getting your prescriptions, you want to know the risks and side effects. The Clery Act is the same thing for colleges and universities, so that your students can make those good choices about their safety and have all the information possible to be able to make those decisions. So when your child comes to you and says, I got this email about a crime that occurred on our campus and I'm feeling concerned about it, that's a valid feeling. It's normal to feel that way. But remember, if they have that conversation with you, the intention of the Clery Act is so that they can continue to make that informed decision about their safety.
So we do have one question, and this is always kind of a sensitive one. Are students told where not to visit off campus? So, I will say that, it's a very varied kind of neighborhood right around Tulane, but the whole city of New Orleans is like that. So what we mostly do is try to recommend particular corridors around campus that have better lighting, more foot traffic, but we even, want students to know, I think in making that adjustment to not having a car, they need to really adjust their behavior to kind of be more aware that you're more at risk if you're, on foot than you would be if you're like within a car or something. And so I think that's one of those the biggest transitions and adjustments they have to make, to just being more mindful about their safety when they're traveling that way. So there are some particular streets where we recommend that they kind of use, and they'll get that information during their orientation time. And there is I'll try to include a link to this website on the TUPD website that gives them sort of a map and shows them where there is more traffic, better lighting, off campus nearby. And I don't know if, all of you may have heard this information so far, but TUPD also patrols off campus in our local neighborhood. So they have and they have an arrangement with NOPD about all of that, so that they actually have patrols, within like I think a mile radius of campus. And I might not remember this exactly, so I'll send you that information. So that's something good to know, that's part of our whole kind of community plan. And I don't know, Margaret, is there anything else you might want to mention about that?
Sure. One thing I would note too is that since I was a student at Tulane many moons ago, something that's really changed for our students is using apps like Lyft and Uber and rideshare. When I was a student here, we didn't really leave campus very much. If it was walkable, that's where we go. Now we see our students using things like ride shares, Ubers, Lyft, whatever it might be, to go explore other parts of the city. And there is so much culture and wonderful things to explore here in New Orleans, but I would have a conversation with your students about safety in those sorts of ride share apps as well, when we're talking about what safety measures can we do for our students to make sure that they are making those right decisions for themselves. Is having a good safety conversation surrounding rideshare and Lyft services.
And one parent asked, what about Bourbon Street? Are students encouraged not to go? I think that we try to very much highlight a lot of the other aspects of New Orleans culture and attractions and things to do. And honestly, people who have lived here as natives in New Orleans, or if they've settled here, even if they didn't originally grow up here, would tell you that they rarely go to Bourbon Street. So we know that for first-year students, that may be what they've heard, or they've mostly seen sort of the hype and the things that are sort of promoted to tourists. And so what we really try to do is expose them to other aspects of New Orleans to take advantage of that are not all about, sort of a strip of bars and stuff. So, and some of what your students will do in our sort of revised element of the orientation program is that they will have some excursions into the city that'll be, guided by staff and, our student volunteers, that will also expose them to some of these other areas. So they'll just learn things beyond the stereotype of New Orleans. So we find that very, very important at Tulane. We're always trying to broaden their understanding of Tulane and kind of New Orleans. There's so many vibrant, interesting, different neighborhoods in New Orleans. So we really try to highlight that so that they kind of understand there's all kinds of other ways to explore, be entertained, have recreation, through outdoor activities and all kinds of things. Nobody's doing very many outdoor activities right now this summer. It's so hot. But so I just want you to be assured that we really do try to focus on a lot of other things and encourage students to, make those kinds of choices, explore the things beyond the hype. I hope that helps answer that question. So if there are no other questions, I think that we will close now, and I will send everybody who registered a link to the slides and to the recording even before it probably goes on the website. So so just wait for that for a couple of days and that'll be ready. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you, Margaret, for your expertise and your time to share all this good information with us. So thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you, Penny.
Bye-bye.